Hello number ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy. So today I found a video and it's a viral video that I think we should check out. First for authenticity, and then if it checks out, this could be really fascinating. So the video in question is called The Sound of Ancient Languages You Haven't Seen Anything Like This Before. Given thumbnail wise, I think what we are looking at is Acadian. And when it comes to the first possible red flag is the title of the channel, Equator AI. Now you might be thinking, well, if this is just AI nonsense, I don't want to watch it. I understand, but the animations are indeed AI, and they do look pretty bad, to be honest, so we will cringe at that. But the voices are not, and I will prove that in a second. The voices are real, so I do think this is worth your time. Now, there are several languages, and to be fair, the video would have really benefited from chapters, but what we're working with is Old Norse, Mayan language, Latin, meaning of course classical Latin by the way this guy is dressed. Then we've got Middle Chinese, Old English, so AngloSaxon, Old Church Slavonic, Proto-Celtic language, holy moly, Middle Egyptian, really looking forward to that one, Ryukyuan language, interesting, Ancient Greek, now we are talking. Then we have the Phoenician language, this is actually very good selection. Hittite, Quechua or Quechua, there will be Inca, and then Acadian. I believe I skipped something. Yeah, there we go. There's also Old Japanese. So we have a lot of languages we can work with. But in order for this to make sense, what we're going to do, instead of going with the chronological order as is, I'm going to begin first with Latin and then with Ancient Greek. Because this way, by starting with languages that I can actually assess, since I have either training or I know someone with training, then we can see if those are authentic. We can say it's good, it's really bad, it's horrible. Then, you know, by that, we know if it's going to be a waste of time with the rest of the languages, or if instead maybe there is something behind this. Latin, he'd probably think I'm some kind of barbarian with my length of hair.
Rem publica, quirites, quidamque omnium vestrum, bona, fortunas, coniuges, liberosque vestros, atque hoc domicilium clarissimi imperi, fortunatissima, pulcherrimanque urbem, odierno die, deorum immortalium summu erga vos amore, laboribus, consiliis, periculis meis, e flammatque ferro, ac pane...
Okay, so what can we say about this? Well, first and foremost, yes, the voice is clearly recorded. In fact, it's probably ripped from somewhere. So there is that. On one hand, it's good because it's not AI voice, but on the other hand, there is no mention of who the person is, which probably means this was used without their consent. What about the quality of the presentation? Well, clearly the person is using classical Latin or reconstructed Latin pronunciation, which is always a positive. And the way we can identify that is because, of course, the V's sound like W's. The C's are always hard, so you wouldn't say Caesar, that would be the ecclesiastical pronunciation, too late for someone in ancient Rome, but it would sound like Caesar. Caesar. So yeah, the consonants and vowels, there is some phonemic vowel length in there, but I believe by the way it sounds, it's someone who was given a script but probably is not as trained as you would want them to be with the length distinction between vowels. I would consider it classical Latin, so it's correct. Not impressive though. So there are much better speakers of classical Latin and people that can do a much better pronunciation. The person is clearly Italian, and in fact to my ear sounds quite northern. I can tell he's a northern Italian by the intonation, so the intonation sounds a little modern. Of course the diphthongs are full, as it should be in classical Latin. The only thing I would say that the S that this person is using sound full frontal rather than being retracted as they should be in classical Latin, so probably someone from maybe Milan, my guess would be. Classical Latin would have sounded crisp, rhythmic and quite musical. It was more similar to Spanish or Italian in its clear vowel sounds and consistent pronunciation rules, but with a distinctive W sound for the V that today is not found in these languages anymore. And unlike later periods, classical Latin maintained relatively uniform pronunciation across the Roman world, among at least educated speakers, though regional accents certainly existed and rural variety would have still been recognizable. For those who don't know, the reconstruction comes from poetry meter, inscription, grammatical treatises, and comparative analysis with Romance languages, development and linguistic evolution. Okay, let's jump into ancient Greek. I'm excited now.
Men krokopeplos από ωκεανού Ιωσοάων Ornut hinatanaduisi puos perui ed brotuisin, hed snevasicane teu paradora perusa. Hör de patrokloi perikemenon hon philon hyon, Klaiunta ligeos, poles dampfauton hetairui myrunt, heden tuisi pasista to divat heaon.
All right. I only have one thing to say. Ioannis Stratakis. My friend Luke Ranieri recognized the voice immediately. We talked about it. That's an actual Greek speaker. He's from Greece, and he's one of the very few that utilizes ancient Greek pronunciation. So yes, what you're hearing is not modern Greek pronunciation. It is probably Attic pronunciation, I would say. It's probably ancient Attic pronunciation. It's a pretty famous speaker. How is it done? I would still say middle of the road. So it is at least the ancient sound of the language. The way he pronounces the consonants sounds correct in the sense that, for instance, the theta didn't sound like a th, like in modern Greek, but it sounded more like a th, which can be quite strange to modern Greek speakers. And the diphthongs like I and O would have been complete, not simplified. And there are a few other differences. Now, why do I say it's kind of middle of the road, but it's not a great representation? Because the pitch is not great. Here is the thing. Ancient Greek used pitch accent rather than a stress accent as modern Greek. This meant syllables rose and fell in musical pitch rather than being emphasized through volume or force, and words would have had an acute, grave, or circumflex accent marks indicating pitch changes. Of course, ancient Greek had different dialects: Attic, Ionic, Doric, Aeolic, which all had their own distinct pronunciation patterns and vocabulary. But in general, the overall sound of ancient Greek would have been a little more choppy or staccato due to the pitch accent system, and would have been quite musical in quality. It would be largely distinct from anything modern, but still recognizable in some instances. Alright, so far so good. Let's go to Anglo-Saxon, because I'm making my own video on the Anglo-Saxon language, which is basically Old English.
Je weet tha Nelsian sutha nicht bekom hean huses, who hit ringdena after berthea je boon hafton. Fan tha ther inne athalinga je drikt swefan after symbol. Sorgene kuthan wonshaft wera, wicht onhel o grim on grady, jerosona was, reuch on retha on rasta yanam, thrichti thena. On FD
Oh, sorry, I actually got invested. This was actually pretty nice. Did you notice the rolled R, the R often used? The H is strongly aspirated. Some words are still recognizable, like house becoming hus. There are quite a few things that they really did get right, so I actually like this one a lot up to this point. Probably my favorite. Anglo-Saxon sounded dramatically different from modern English, so much so that it would be difficult to comprehend to English speakers today. It had much more of a guttural or Germanic sounding quality to it, and it would have been therefore closer to Old High German or Old Norse than modern English, at least in the way it sounds, with a more rhythmic, alliterative feel and definitely harder consonantal quality. It's almost like the language would have had some sort of percussive rhythm to it. I want to move into Egyptian now, and then maybe Celtic. Mr. What is this guy? A priest. He's a priest, 100%. Don't sacrifice me to anything, and we can be friends.
Hena hamuna charneb harbau. Him hat wabiner. Hamas. Yam natures. Hachen. Redenes. Yitzuenef. Pedes.
Wow, they really made it. You know, here's one thing that they're doing both with the ancient Egyptian and the Latin. They're using the most formal qualities of these languages. Now with Latin, in this case, I think it's pretty cool. Also, we have a little bit of an echo. I appreciate that because it makes you feel like I'm inside literally a temple I love that. The thing about Latin, though, is that every time we listen to this very dignified, and I will speak to you now, plebs, which is fine. I mean, the guy was a senator. But I think what I would like to make, if you're interested, and please let me know in the comments, if I see enough comments, I will do it. It would be nice to dress up, maybe as a Roman legionary, as a Roman person, and as I'm having conversations, rather than doing this, I'm in an auditorium speaking to the people, do a more everyday feel of the language. So something that they would have done not for public talk or as an orator, but something that would be like, how did ancient Romans actually spoke to themselves, like to the friends, family members, come on, pass me the salt, I want to eat some, I want to put some in my soup, type of discussion. Anyways, similar situation here, very ritualistic in a way. This was spoken, but I really liked it a lot. I'm not an expert on ancient Egyptian, but I'll give you some information now. Compared to the other languages we have reviewed so far, ancient Egyptian is a lot more challenging to reconstruct. That is because hieroglyphs, which are the primary way of writing, only recorded consonants, not vowels. Therefore, a lot of the vowels we place are vowels of convention, and even though some can be reconstructed through Coptic, a lot is complete utter speculation, and we could be just wrong. The language is still heavy consonantal, a bit like Arabic or Hebrew, built around consonant roots, must have had a guttural quality, emphatic consonants, glottal stops, and rolled R's. And I think the reason why they chose the Middle Egyptian is because in general it is the classical form that we know best. Ancient Egyptian likely sounded somewhat a bit like Arabic, with similar throaty emphatic consonants and a flow to it, which would have been heavy rhythmic. It would have been completely foreign to modern ears, including having sounds that don't really exist in European languages. I want to listen to the Celt. Alright, enemy. Show me what you've got. I actually like Celt. It was a joke, crying out loud, you guys. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.
Anthros, Esio enemesi, Esticadios anmantovos, Rigetoe tuageti, Budatoa uraga esti, Indiarai, Keni esti enemesi. Sanatir pe Esio enemesi, Esticade anmantovos, Rigetove tureti, Budatova raga esti, Indiarai, Keni esti enemesi. Anathar paid.
I love that he's wearing mail. I mean, yeah, the Romans did copy it from the Gauls, and the Gauls are among the Celts. I mean, at least for what we are told by Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar does say, in our language we call them Gauls, but in their language they call themselves Celts. So part of kind of the, at least continental Celtic realities, and then you have the insular Celtic realities, like the Britons and Cornwall and Ireland and parts of Scotland, even though the languages in Scotland are actually connected to the Irish. Proto-Celtic, what do we think? I think it sounds amazing. I love it. I love the sound of it. I don't know how accurate it is, but I will give you some information on the language now for what we know. As the other languages, Proto-Celtic has been reconstructed through comparative linguistics as it was spoken around 1200 to 500 BC. However, this was before writing systems were recorded, so once again, very speculative. What we can think, though, is that they had a rich system of consonant clusters, which then become simplified in later varieties, and there probably was a certain level of palatalization or softening of certain consonants already by the time we reached to the end of Proto-Celtic language. The overall sound quality would have been consonant heavy, and we did feel this in this recording, which I did appreciate, possibly with a lot of guttural sounds like qu. In fact, if compared to modern Celtic languages, including Irish and Welsh, it would have been less musical. I'm really curious with Phoenician. Let's go for Phoenician.
شليم شفرست وقتوش بتايو وخرفت إش بني ويقتوش بشات رب تحت رب مخند بشد لبيم لقيا عليو لاميا نكاسف بن شاسد واسان بن نمير إش بباني مسانقاو بتسو تم بتم.
Oh yeah, Pitim, your sister. Love it. I love it. You could really tell it's Semitic don't you? What do you think? To me, it sounds closer to Hebrew than it does to Arabic, but it still is that kind of Middle Eastern quality, even in its Phoenician version, because of course Phoenicians were Semitic, the ones that will then found Carthage, even though DNA analysis shows that by the time they become Carthaginians already, even though they may still have preserved a very inner Semitic core, the majority of the DNA of the population would have changed, and by then they would have been a lot closer to either people in the Anatolian Peninsula, like Turkish, or in general Aegean, still maintaining cultural and linguistic Semitic traits. Now, the reason why it sounds quite familiar and in fact similar to other Semitic languages, if you've had a chance to listen to them, is because just like those, it has heavy consonantal structure, which means it's built around 3 consonant root patterns. Although, once again, their alphabet containing 22 consonants did not have any vowel. And in fact, some of these consonants would have been rather emphatic or pushed, if you will, particularly when it comes to pharyngeal fricatives. And we would have found several instances of glottal stop, so a sharp cut-off sound between vowels, and strong sibilants, so variation of the s and the sh. Acadian, hit me with the Acadian, let's go.
Ibri sha'aram mashudanish. Itia itallaku kalumarzatim. Enkidu sha'aram mashudanish. Itia itallaku kalumarzatim. Illikma anashimatu awilutim. Uri umushi elishu abki. Ul adishu anakeberim. Ibriman itabiam anarignia. Sebetumim usebemushiatim.
Oh, come on, you mention Enkidu and you don't tell me about Gilgamesh? What's wrong with you? So, yeah, very cool, very cool. Once again, Acadian is a Semitic language, as it's explained here. Now, the reason why they're also mentioning the Sumerians here, who are not Semitic and therefore do not speak a Semitic languages, I recently made a video about it on my history channel, I'll put a link in the description, is because the reason why these are often spoken together, you often talk about Sumerians and Acadians, is because they inhabit virtually a very similar area. They are both in the Middle East. However, Acadians are further north, whereas Sumerians are further south. And once again, the two populations are genetically unrelated. The reason why Acadian is interesting is because it's the earliest known Semitic language, which was written in cuneiform script from around 2500 to 100 BC. It retained several, obviously, archaic sounds, which are mostly lost in later Semitic languages, including 4-way sibilant distinction. In other words, multiple different S sounds than later languages, which then would have merged. To give you an idea, we would have found S, Sh, S, and Z. As far as we know, they may have only had 3 basic vowels, A, I, U, including a tendency to contract vowels. However, this is a feature that changes depending on whether we're talking about core system of dialectical variations. So, in other words, if Hebrew sounds ancient to you, Akkadian would have sounded primordial. Let's go for Hittite, and then we'll check out Japanese.
رمزسو پچحم أريمدو زاو قيسو حتيتوي زوالنا يالوكر متالخ أتامخر ززبقخو هبقخر بقيخو وزش حشرخو كتان.
Sounds a little drunk, but apart from that, very, very interesting. Hittite was spoken in ancient Anatolia, so modern Turkey, and it's considered an Indo-European language from 1650 to 1200 BC, offering a fascinating insight into early Indo-European sounds. As far as we know, we have one of the characteristics is the laryngeals. In other words, there are 3 different H sounds that affected surrounding vowels. Good luck with that. And a complex consonant cluster system, maintaining difficult consonant combinations. We also have situations of gemination, where double consonants were phonemically important, and a simple 5-vowel system, A, E, I, O, U. Another phenomenon that happens linguistically is the laryngeal coloring, meaning that laryngeal consonants affected vowel quality. Japanese, ladies and gentlemen, Japanese.
今ちたちこの里ぱわんがおぽなか村なり Titi papapa arupa ta mata patakaini indai tati arupa uminiti tsunandori tsun warai arupa umi mata kapaniti uo tori arupa koini numboriti atsombun chikaramba monina pitoyo yururukani.
That's crazy. You can hear people speaking over. I mean, could you freaking shut up and respect the fact that the ladies, you know what I mean? What can I say? As a modern Japanese speaker, I can, of course, recognize some words. She said mura for like village. She spoke a little bit about the sea, I believe. Also, she's using, and I'm a little familiar with this because I did take an 8th credit exam of Japanese philology. And so we looked at some of the sound modifications from classical Japanese to modern Japanese, one of which is, for example, basically, you know how Japanese puts the copula of the verb to be at the end, des or da, des for formality, but at this time that would have been, instead you would have heard nari, which I did hear, so it's still, it kind of, if you're familiar with Japanese and you know something des, then in old Japanese would be something nari, so seisha wa samurai nari, to say I am a samurai, instead of saying watashi wa samurai desu. Kind of similar, right? And then I didn't hear so. I was expecting so as an exclamation particle at the end, which would be the old version of zo. Zo is kind of gone. You hear it in anime when they say ikuzo. Mostly in actual spoken Japanese. Well, maybe if you're joking, naguruzo. Maybe if you're joking, but otherwise you will hear yo a lot more. Sa, ikusa, sa. Yeah, you'll hear that. And nani shiten da yo. So you do hear yo. And wa if you are like kind of a traditional lady. Kirei wa. So was something that they said in old Japanese at the end. So gambe yo or gambe so. So instead of zo. Whatever. So interesting, different. It does sound quite different, but I don't know how trained the person that was actually doing this was. Old Japanese, usually we're talking 8th century to the 12th century, so we could say kind of medieval Japanese or feudal Japanese, if you don't want to use the word medieval because you're lovely like that. It would have sounded quite different from modern Japanese. It had a more complex vowel distinction. They had an 8 vowel system, meaning that you would have 2 distinct types of I, E, and O. A distinction of different types of O is, I believe, still present in Korean, while in Japanese, you mostly have one quality now. A fascinating thing is that something kind of happened backwards in the sense that in Europe, if you look at Latin and compare it to Italian, then Latin had long and short vowels. Italian doesn't really distinguish as much. It happens, but it's mostly a matter of stress. In Japanese, however, modern Japanese long vowels developed later from vowel sequences. So you wouldn't really have had long vowels per se in this version of Japanese. And also, they would have had a different R sound, likely more like a tap or a trill, not the modern Japanese R. Also, some clusters, or specifically consonant clusters, would have been simplified later. And pitch patterns would be different to the ones we have in Japanese, although then again, of course, there is regional variety even in modern Japanese. Also, a lot of Chinese characters were used phonetically to show pronunciation, and there is a certain level of poetry constraints, so meter and rhyme in classical poetry. So when you read poetry, if this was the case, then it doesn't exactly sound as it would when you had 2 people in a village speaking to each other. Old Norse, I want to do Old Norse.
Setjumst þá rökstóla, bróðir. Hvað hef ég gjört til að bera svo bága kvenhyrni? Við bræður nú þann þroska að kvennefni myndu mök á oss leita, hví hefur oss eigi orðið ágengt í þeim efnum. Hygg að ek viti betur en skinnhelu góð og guður sæmdu þann sið að ek skuli deyja einn og yfirgefin. Hygg ek viti betur en skinnhelu góð og guður sæmdu þann sið að ek skuli deyja.
Whatever you said, I agree, sir. Do not introduce me to the business end of your acts. Thank you. Old Norse, what can I say? Well, this one I would have to review with Dr. Crawford. If you're not aware of his channel, Dr. Crawford is the man when it comes to Old Norse, so I'm not going to speak about the quality of it because there are better speakers. Maybe ask him. I might ask him actually directly. Regardless, let me tell you a little bit about Old Norse. Old Norse had a distinctive sound quite different from modern Scandinavian languages, but still clearly related. It would have been very guttural and harsh sounding compared to modern Nordic languages, strong rolled sounds through and through, retained th sounds like the th and th that are mostly lost in Scandinavian languages. The j would have sounded more like a y, the v at the beginning of words would have sounded like a w, again typical of older languages, including Latin. It had a complex system of long and short vowels that were phonemically distinct and included nasal sounds. Also, diphthongs would have been more prevalent than in modern languages. In other words, to us, probably the heavy usage of consonant clusters would have made it sound quite crunchy, if you will. Now, did it have a pitch accent system similar to modern Swedish, Norwegian? Maybe. There's probably something I need to check with the doctor, the professor, but it definitely would have been more rhythmic than modern languages. Overall, a very forceful sounding language. All right, number ones, but I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I was trying to take off. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Thank you very much for watching. And if you're interested, I could make like dedicated videos. As I told you, I am making one dedicated to Anglo-Saxons. We'll try to reconstruct it and build some interesting representations. But if there is any of the languages we have covered today that you would like me to go into a deeper analysis, do let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching and joining Metatron's Academy. Bye.